So that was a fun interview with Diamond and Silk. Now, I knew from their videos that if I brought up Russia, they would probably hang up on me, the false Russia narrative, which they're clearly sick of hearing about. Everyone's sick of hearing about it, but at least Shad Olson, who's on the line with me right now, is willing to talk about the pushback, courtesy of Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And so we're going to talk to him in South Dakota, Black Hawk, South Dakota. Beautiful place. You should visit it. And the whole Black Hills area is. And we're going to talk about some of the other topics I touched upon with Diamond and Silk. So, Shad, thank you for joining me.
Hey, Adam. Thank you for having me back. It's great to talk to you.
Privilege, pleasure, all that. Okay, so your thoughts on the pushback on Russia?
Well, I just, I laughed a very satisfying laugh watching what Sarah Huckabee Sanders did to the Washington Press Corps this week. She said, "You want to talk about Russia? Let's talk about this false narrative that's been constructed around Russia. Let's talk about $500,000 to Bill Clinton for a single speech and being thanked personally by Vladimir Putin. Let's talk about Hillary Clinton giving Russia the rights to 1/4 to 1/5 of all the uranium in the United States, giving that to a Russian firm that, oh, by the way, just happened to give some money to the Clinton Foundation. And then let's talk about John Podesta, Hillary's campaign manager, getting paid $60 million to lobby on behalf of the Russian National Bank.
Wait, could you say $60 million?
60 million. The range, we know it was at least 35 million, but good estimates in terms of the compensation and the way the package was outlined put that top number close to $60 million. So
that's 35 million.
35 million. Actually, but there were some incentives and some sweeteners in there that weren't disclosed. It's the fine print of that agreement, and if there's been some very fine journalism that's been done about it, the number is probably actually closer to $60 million to Podesta to get them immunity from U.S. economic sanctions. It was going to be very hurtful to them. The way that he did that, he sat on the board of a Russian nanotech energy startup, and it was a direct subsidiary of the Russian National Bank. And so John Podesta, who sat on the board of that bank, or on the board of that startup, energy startup, was able to lobby and say, look, these people are invested in green energy. They're invested in these new technologies. They really deserve a break. And so he lobbied to get the Russian National Bank immunity from the U.S. sanctions, and he got a cool paycheck of $60 million. Let
me just backtrack. So this, like so much of green energy, seems to be and for that matter, Chelsea Clinton's salaries for doing no work, seems to be just a very sophisticated form of money laundering that, not to give any sympathy to Jesse Jackson Jr. or Corinne Brown, but just that doesn't seem to be available to, say, members of the Congressional Black Caucus who are just getting caught and going to jail for plain old graft.
Well, and not only that, Adam. It's a global Ponzi scheme. They're using this and these very juicy, very financially palatable cutouts that are, as you know, exclusively the realm of the moneyed and very powerful elite. This is the rarefied air of an investment sector that only these people have access to.
Right.
And this is where we're headed. It's a whole conversation about carbon credits and special drawing rights and the new economy that these people had planned for the world under the enforcement of the United Nations Global Green Fund. Mm-hmm. This was the plan. This was a transition from the existing economy into a brand new economy that would use completely different currency, and it gives only them the opportunity for these proprietary investment opportunities. This is exactly what John Podesta was wrapped up in Russia, in this nanotech firm, in the startup. And then when they went through their IPO, it gets better. When they went through their initial public offering for that Russian nanotech firm, Podesta was able to offsell tens of thousands of shares of proprietary stock to profit even further from that transaction, and his ability to lobby to make sure that the Russian National Bank was excluded from the American sanctions. So let's talk about Russian collusion, shall we? Let's really talk about it.
And how much did Sarah Huckabee Sanders get into that? I mean, I don't think she used the term Ponzi scheme or went into the detail that you did, but did she at least hint at it, in your opinion?
She brought up explicitly Podesta's involvement with the Russian National Bank and his lobbying to make sure that they got a cutout and were excluded from the U.S. sanctions. So she did mention it. She didn't go into the detail that I did. This is all the backstory and some of the stuff that, frankly, the American media, I don't know if they would even understand it well enough to be able to outline it if it were their desire to actually report about democratic Russian collusion. But they would sooner, they'd no sooner touch anything that smelled of that than, be hogtied and burned alive in a Sizzler parking lot somewhere in South Texas by Alex Jones. I mean, they're not going to touch it. But the truth of the matter is these details are waiting, and if they were given any kind of light of day to the American public, it would be very clear who in American government is actually guilty of colluding with the Russians.
Yeah, it's like they might be talking about Tony Podesta's taste in art of nude teenagers in their parents' homes. But, of course, we won't hear about that. We'll hear about Pete Rose's affair, which I'm not excusing, 40 years ago with a woman who was a girl who was underage. We'll hear about that, but not anything about Tony Podesta. But
yeah, it's amazing the sort of past and the sort of, you want to talk about immunity. John Podesta gets immunity for this Russian National Bank. The Democrats, the leftists in this country are being given immunity from any kind of exculpatory purview by the investigative media in the United States. They're being given all kinds of immunity. There's no light that's being shined in these dark places about what's actually happening. And Adam, let's look at it. We're in the post-political era. This isn't about politics anymore. It's about a final battle. It's about a battle for control for the country by a group of people who would sooner burn us down and burn down the final remnant of the nation than to allow the message of populism, free markets, traditional American ideals, to allow any of that to succeed again and thrive and be given new life under the administration of President Donald Trump. And that's what
oligarchy. It's been going on for centuries. It's about protecting the children. Chelsea Clinton of the elite. Chelsea Clinton being a great example of it. It's just that simple. Look at the way Biden's niece doesn't get prosecuted for whatever it was that she did. There's another person, when you see the corruption, and I brought this up with Diamond and Silk, they obviously were not going to be fans of hers. Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Awan scandal, which of course the media isn't covering, but I know you're following that.
And this, Adam, if this were happening, and again, if this were tied in any way, shape, or form to anybody in the Trump circle, this would be the only story that we heard about. But you have Debbie Wasserman Schultz, of course, the former and you want to know what it takes to actually be fired if you're head of the Democratic National Committee. Debbie Wasserman Schultz figured out how to do that. And so she was actually fired as the DNC chair and has had this trail of corruption attached to her. Now we find out that she's involved with this IT manager and the Awan brothers. And who, by the way, who was last seen with Seth Rich prior to his death?
Yep, and we don't know about that missing hour and a half of time from when he left the party, left the bar.
And Juan tries to make a run for Karachi, Pakistan. And anytime that somebody feels that they're going to be safer in Pakistan than they are in the United States, you know that maybe just possibly they have something that could be damaging to the Clintons on those hard drives that he was trying to break off with.
Now, it seems like they recover those. I'm just a little shocked, aren't you, by the fact that they got him on his way to Pakistan, that it wasn't greased for him through the TSA or whatever else. I mean, I'm of the belief it's so corrupt that he would have had his getaway smoothly planned, yet apparently that was not the case. I mean, isn't that a little shocking to you, or is Trump getting some control over government bureaucracies at this point?
It is, and it's interesting, too, that he wouldn't have just had private jet service that would have been able to, get him out of the country quickly and under cover of night, we would assume. And it's going to be interesting if they actually dig into some of this. This is why it's so important. That's why we're in such a critical time period. Trump and the administration have to be able to move quickly on these investigations and make some traction and some headway in finding out exactly what is what, and make some progress in these areas where there's clear corruption and where it's high time that there's some justice.
Well, is it seeming to you that they may actually be doing that? Like, watch what Sessions has said lately, as opposed to what Trump said about Sessions, which didn't go anywhere, or while people were distracted by Scaramucci and other things, it seems like they're actually moving on this.
Well, yeah, and we could look at what Donald Trump said about Jeff Sessions as possibly, lighting a fairly good-sized bonfire under his keister.
Yeah.
And maybe that's bearing some fruit. I'm still of the mindset that Sessions may not be long for that position, or maybe he gets moved to Director of Homeland Security or something like that. He's valuable on the issue of immigration, but he is deemed at least to this point, to be a bit reticent about actually going after people inside the Clinton crime syndicate. And that area is simply begging for there to be an upholding of the integrity of the Department of Justice as it pertains to those people. If we're not going to prosecute these people, who would we ever prosecute in the United States?
Well, I could answer that question. People selling lemonade, little kids selling lemonade without a government permit. But we only have about a minute or so. Any final thoughts on what Diamond and Silk said, and can you make sure to conclude with how people can follow you and buy your book?
This, Adam, what we're watching, and Diamond and Silk always are such an entertaining listen. They bring so much truth and do it in an entertaining fashion. What we're watching right now, this is all to invalidate. We're still talking about the invalidation of the 2016 election result, the pushback against Donald Trump to say that he is not a legitimate president. This is trying, they're doing everything they can because they lost the election on points, they lost the election on message, but what they're trying to do is to delegitimize it to the point that they can come back in 2020 and in the midterms in 2018 and say, look, the American people were hoodwinked, they were fooled, this is a fraud, and so by rights, Democrats deserve to win these elections in 2018 and 2020. You can almost hear Hillary Clinton standing on some podium somewhere in 2019 and saying, the Russians stole my cookie in 2016, and so by all rights, I deserve to be elected and have my chance at the brass ring in 2020. If this narrative is not defeated, dissolved, and pushed back upon heading into 2020, Hillary Clinton is once again going to be a viable presidential candidate. Make no mistake about it. She wants another chance at this, and she wants another bite at the apple. And this is the strategy that they're trying to use to give her the opportunity and to give any Democrat an opportunity to unseat Donald Trump in the 2020 election. That's where we're headed.
I'm still more worried right now about Eric Holder being the nominee, or Kamala Harris, as I call her, and that was not a mispronunciation, if you know anything about her history. But anyhow, how can people follow you and buy your book?
They can find, we're just in the startup of getting the Shad Olson radio show back out of the closet after about a 3-year or 4-year hiatus, and so they can find that at shadolsonshow.com. They can also buy my book at amazon.com. Tales from the Red Rooster Cafe, Shad Olson at amazon.com. And
you're on Twitter at Shad Olson, OLSON.
Yeah, that's right. I don't do much tweeting. I'm mostly on Facebook.
Gotcha.
Too.
All right. Great having you on today, Shad. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Adam.